So welcome back to our journey through the Bible. Before we get into today's reading, I want to quickly mention that we will not have a devotional on Thursday, on Thanksgiving Day. We're hosting a church family Zoom chat at 11 o'clock that morning, so I encourage you to participate in that if you're interested. The link was in yesterday's weekly email, or you can contact me and I'll gladly forward that link to you. But as far as this series, we'll take the day off on Thursday and we'll reconvene next Tuesday, which remarkably is already December 1st at noon. For today, I want to stay with the gospel according to Mark. In our readings over the past couple of days, we've encountered Mark's two accounts of very similar stories, the feeding of the 5,000 and the feeding of the 4,000. The two stories are very similar in a lot of ways, but there's one particular element of how these narratives unfold that I think is worthy of our attention, particularly as we head into the weeks in front of us. So this is the 6th chapter of the Gospel according to Mark, starting with the 30th verse. It says, "The apostles gathered around Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, 'Come away to a deserted place for all by yourselves and rest a while.' For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in a boat to a deserted place by themselves. Now many saw them and going and recognized them, and they hurried there on foot from all of the towns and arrived ahead of them. As he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. When it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, 'This is a deserted place, and this hour is now very late. Send them away so that they may go into the surrounding country and villages and buy something for themselves to eat.' But he answered them, 'You give them something to eat.' They said to him, 'Are we going to go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat?' And he said to them, 'How many loaves have you? Go and see.' When they had found out, they said, 5, and 2 fish. Then he ordered them to get all of the people to sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and of 50s. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to his disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. And all ate, and all were filled. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. Those who had eaten the loaves numbered 5,000 men." There are times that I love the humanity of those who are lifted up as biblical examples of faithfulness. While we tend to reflect on the apostles with a certain amount of reverence, the reality is that they had their human moments too. In this story, they find themselves looking out at a sea of people. Thousands are gathered to hear Jesus and now are not only spiritually, but are physically hungering. So Jesus turns to his apostles and he said, "Go feed them." And I love to imagine the looks on their faces in that moment. Are you nuts? Are we going to spend a fortune to buy enough food for all of these people? Now, already at this point, the apostles are dubious. What Jesus is suggesting is beyond impractical. They can't afford to feed all this people, but Jesus goes on. What do you have? 5 loaves? 2 fish? That'll do. Now, if the apostles were dubious on that first interaction, you can only imagine the disbelief in this moment. 5 loaves, 2 fish, thousands of hungering people. The math just didn't work. The apostles knew that. But that's the thing. I sometimes have referred to it as God's math. Because God's math and ours, they're not the same. Our math is that 1,000 people can't share a loaf of bread and 2,500 can't share one fish. It doesn't work. Suddenly we're handing out communion wafers and chiclet-sized pieces of fish and calling it dinner. In our math, it doesn't work, but God's math isn't ours. In God's math, 5 loaves and 2 fish is plenty, because God's math is not a zero-sum game. In God's math, all can eat and be filled, and you can have more left over than you even started with. In God's math, that which we bring is amplified in ways so beyond our capacities to make a difference, and it does so in ways so much greater than that which we'd predict in the math of our own. And that, in the end, is the reminder that I think we could all use in the face of the weeks that are coming. I have to tell you that I'm weary, nervous, honestly, of some of the stories that I expect to see covered in the news in these coming weeks. While many of those of us who are participating in these devotionals are blessed with resources and family and friend support networks that have provided us with a stable foundation, both emotionally and practically throughout these challenging times, that's not the case for a lot of people. Lines at food banks were already backing up for hours, and those are only growing as we head into the holiday season. More and more businesses and regions are having to step back in what they're doing right at the time in which they would have historically amplified their economic activity. I'm picturing holiday ringers standing outside stores asking for charitable donations in their little red buckets, while fewer and few people are even going to those stores to pass them by. And all of this is at the same time that our senses of isolation, despair, worry, and fear will be exaggerated like anything beyond anything we've yet to experience over the course of the past 8 months. In other words, the need around us in most every way will be greater over the course of the next 4 to 5 weeks than anything we've seen so far. Or if I can put it another way, we will increasingly find ourselves in these coming days and weeks in that same position as those apostles, staring out at that sea of people in need, Jesus turning to us and saying, "Go help," and our jaws dropping to the floor as we do our math and consider how little we can do with our few loaves and our couple of fish. It's right there, however, that I think we all could use that reminder that it's not our math that counts. God's math is different. God's math takes our few loaves, our couple of fish, and turns it into an impact greater than anything we can imagine. We won't always see it, we'll never understand how, but in God's math, our part is always simple: to take what we have to do what we can. In God's math, our part is to enter in with our few loaves and our fish, be it food or compassion or time or energy or wisdom or I could keep going. In God's math, our part is to bring what we can, no matter how little, no matter how much, and to allow God to do the rest. The sea of people is growing, and I truly expect that the stories will be ever more present in the days and the weeks ahead. And yes, Jesus is turning to us in the face of that overwhelming need and saying, "Go help." And no, in our math, what we have to bring will never be enough. But in God's math, if we will just bring it, there is no telling the difference it will make in the lives of those in need. Let's be in prayer together. Loving God, you work miracles through the humble and glory through the gifts of your children. Help us, God, to not only see the need that surrounds, but to be moved to enter in with that which we can bring. Help us to see beyond our limitations, God, to see the wonder that is your math, and give us the faith to enter in, no matter how little, no matter how much. To enter in with that confidence that in you there is always enough. In his name, amen. As always, I thank you for being here. I pray that you have a wonderful and joyous Thanksgiving, and I look forward to seeing you here Sunday, maybe on Zoom Thursday on Thanksgiving, and then again next Tuesday here at noon. Have a blessed afternoon.